The courtroom was supposed to be a place of justice, but today, it felt more like a battleground. The air was thick with tension as Judge Reynolds sat high on his bench, peering down at the woman standing before him. His gavel had already hit the wood twice, a sharp warning that he was in control. "You will not speak over me in my courtroom," he snapped, his voice echoing through the chambers. The woman, standing tall in a sleek navy blue suit, didn't flinch. Her expression remained calm, unreadable, as if she had seen far worse than an angry judge trying to assert his power. Her name was Maya Brooks, and what no one in that courtroom knew, not the judge, not the attorneys, not the audience whispering in the back, was that she was no ordinary woman. Maya was a top intelligence officer for the CIA, trained in high-level operations, skilled in dismantling threats most people didn't even know existed. Judge Reynolds, however, saw none of that. To him, Maya was just another defendant, another black woman he believed he could silence with his authority. "If you continue to interrupt, I will hold you in contempt," he warned, his frustration growing. Maya tilted her head slightly, as if studying him. She had spent years decoding the intentions of world leaders, spies, and criminals, and she recognized what was happening here. He wanted control. He wanted obedience. And more than anything, he wanted to remind her of her place. But Maya had spent her entire career defying expectations. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as people sensed the rising tension. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while the prosecutor smirked, assuming Maya would fold under the judge's pressure. But those who underestimated Maya never saw what was coming next. She took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Your Honor," she said, her voice measured and unwavering, "I have the right to speak in my own defense." The judge's face darkened. "Not in my courtroom. You don't." For a brief moment, silence filled the space, thick and suffocating. Then, with the ease of someone who had faced real danger before, Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek black ID. She held it up, just long enough for the judge to read the words printed in bold letters. Central Intelligence Agency. The room went still. The prosecutor's smirk disappeared. The defense attorney's jaw dropped slightly. And for the first time that day, Judge Reynolds hesitated. Maya locked eyes with him, her voice calm but firm. "I think it's time we talk about who really has power here, Your Honor." The gavel, moments ago a symbol of control, now rested uselessly in the judge's hand. And in that instant, everyone in the courtroom realized Maya Brooks was not someone to silence. But the real question was, what was she doing here in the first place? The silence in the courtroom stretched on for what felt like forever. Judge Reynolds' grip tightened around his gavel, his knuckles turning white. His eyes flickered between Maya's face and the black ID card she held up, the one with the unmistakable CIA emblem stamped on it. The confidence in his voice wavered for the first time. This doesn't change anything," he muttered, though it was clear he was trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Maya didn't move, didn't blink. She simply let the weight of her presence settle in the room. The people in the gallery whispered in hushed tones, eyes darting back and forth between the judge and the woman who had just flipped the entire situation upside down. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with slicked back hair and an air of arrogance, leaned forward. "Your Honor, may I request a sidebar?" he asked, trying to regain control of the moment. Judge Reynolds exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple before nodding. "Fine. Court is in recess for 10 minutes. He slammed the gavel down, though the sound lacked the same authority it had minutes ago. Maya slipped her badge back into her pocket and turned to leave, but not before catching the judge's gaze. He looked at her differently now, not just as a defendant, but as someone he didn't quite understand. Someone dangerous. As soon as she stepped into the hallway, her attorney David Harper was on her heels. "Maya, what the hell was that?" he whispered harshly, pulling her to the side. His tie was slightly loosened, his forehead slick with sweat. "You never told me you worked for the CIA." She regarded him coolly. "You never asked." David let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "Do you know what kind of mess this puts us in? The judge is already against you, and now you just made him nervous." "Good," she said simply. "That means he's thinking twice." David groaned, clearly frustrated. "Maya, I need to know the truth. What are you really doing here? Why is the CIA involved?" Her expression didn't change. "I can't answer that." David cursed under his breath. "Of course you can't." He looked around the hallway, making sure no one was too close. "Look, I agreed to represent you because I believe something isn't right about this case. But I can't fight blind, Maya. They're accusing you of obstruction of justice, of tampering with classified evidence. If you don't start giving me answers, they're going to bury you in legal red tape." Maya studied him for a moment, weighing her options. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "This case isn't just about me. There are things at play here that are bigger than a courtroom trial. Bigger than Judge Reynolds." David frowned. "Then why don't you just pull some strings? Make this whole thing disappear?" A shadow crossed her face. "Because that's exactly what they want me to do." Before David could press further, a woman in a dark suit approached them. Her presence alone sent a ripple of tension through the air. "Ms. Brooks, we need to talk," she said firmly, flashing a badge of her own. "FBI." David stiffened. "Who are you?" "Special Agent Valerie Cross." The woman replied, her sharp gaze never leaving Maya's. "I suggest we have this conversation in private." Maya nodded slightly, glancing at David. "Wait here." David hesitated but nodded, watching as Maya followed Agent Cross down the hall. They entered a small, dimly lit conference room, and as soon as the door shut behind them, Valerie turned to face her. "You just made a very dangerous move in there," Valerie said, arms crossed. Maya met her gaze steadily. "I did what needed to be done. You flashed a CIA badge in open court." Valerie snapped. "Do you realize what kind of attention that brings? Do you know how many eyes are on you right now?" Maya's jaw tightened. "I don't have a choice, Agent Cross. They're trying to silence me." Valerie sighed, pacing for a moment. "I know what you're trying to do. But if you keep pushing like this, they won't just silence you. They'll erase you." Maya's stomach twisted, but she kept her voice even. "Then I need to move fast." Valerie hesitated, then reached into her pocket and slid a small flash drive across the table. This was intercepted before it reached the evidence room. "I don't know how deep this goes, but I do know one thing. Whatever you're after, it's bigger than any of us." Maya picked up the drive, her fingers tightening around it. She had spent years in the shadows, uncovering secrets that weren't meant to see the light of day. But this time, the secret had followed her into the courtroom. "You need to be careful, Maya," Valerie warned. "They're watching your every move." Maya gave a small, knowing smile. "Then let them watch." She turned and walked out, her mind already racing. The pieces were coming together, but the full picture was still out of reach. All she knew for certain was that this trial wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger, and she was running out of time. Maya stepped out of the conference room, her fingers tightening around the flash drive in her pocket. Every step she took back toward the courtroom felt heavier, as if she were walking straight into a trap she couldn't yet see. David was still waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, his foot tapping anxiously against the polished floor. The moment he saw her, he pushed off the wall and lowered his voice. "Are you going to tell me what's going on now?" he asked, his tone sharp but edged with concern. Maya glanced around, scanning for anyone who might be listening. The courthouse had always been a place of order and law, but now it felt like something else entirely. A battlefield where every move had consequences. "We can't talk here," she murmured, brushing past him. "Not yet." David sighed but followed, clearly frustrated but knowing better than to press her too hard. As they walked back into the courtroom, the energy had shifted. The murmurs were quieter, the glances more suspicious. It wasn't just the judge who had taken notice. Everyone had. Judge Reynolds sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. But there was something different in his posture. He wasn't just irritated anymore. He was wary. "Ms. Brooks," he said slowly, his voice more measured this time. "Are you ready to proceed?" Maya met his gaze, her own unreadable. "I am, Your Honor." The judge studied her for a moment before clearing his throat. "Very well. We'll resume." The next hour passed in a blur of legal arguments, motions, and objections. The prosecution pressed their case harder than ever, determined to paint Maya as someone who had crossed the line. They accused her of withholding evidence, interfering in an ongoing investigation, and using her influence to manipulate the system. Maya sat still, listening carefully, but she could feel the weight of every accusation. She had spent years uncovering the truth, exposing corruption, and stopping threats before they ever reached the public. And now, she was the one being accused of wrongdoing. David did his best to push back, but she could tell even he was struggling to keep up with the speed at which things were unfolding. Every time they tried to get ahead, the prosecution had something new, as if they knew what was coming before. Maya and David even said a word, and that's when it hit her. Someone on the inside was feeding them information. Maya kept her face neutral, but her mind was racing. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It was a chessboard, and someone was moving the pieces against her. The question was, who? As she sat there, listening to the prosecutor lay out another carefully constructed argument, she caught something out of the corner of her eye. In the back of the courtroom, near the exit, stood a man in a dark suit. He wasn't looking at the judge, or the attorneys, or even the jury. He was watching her. Maya forced herself to remain still, but every instinct in her body screamed that something was off. The way he stood, the way he blended into the background, it was a skill she had seen before. He wasn't just an observer. He was intelligence, and not the friendly kind. The prosecution continued, but Maya wasn't listening anymore. She was focused on the man, on the way he shifted ever so slightly when she turned her attention to him. Then, just as suddenly as she had noticed him, he was gone. Maya clenched her jaw, her heart pounding. Someone was watching. Someone was pulling the strings. And if she didn't move carefully, she wasn't going to make it out of this courtroom the same way she walked in. She glanced at David, who was still deep in legal back and forth with the prosecution. He had no idea what was really happening here. But Maya did. And she had just become the target of something much bigger than a trial. The question wasn't whether she could win this case anymore. The question was whether she could survive it.